Hi everyone, welcome to We Knew the Moon. My name's Tracy and I'm here with Dee.
Hi.
And also I'm excited we have a guest on our podcast today. We have Rebecca joining us. Hi Rebecca.
Hi.
Rebecca Burgess is the High Priestess of the Temple of Cornwall. So we're super excited to have her as our first guest on this podcast. And I'm going to hand you over to her. How did you become the Temple of Cornwall High Priestess? Please tell us.
So, like Dee said, I'm Rebecca and I prefer the term Mother Priestess to the Temple of Cornwall because for me, it's a personal thing. High Priestess just gives connotations of like a hierarchy, which there isn't in this temple. It's all an equal space for people to come and worship however they want to or need to at that time. And I became the Mother Priestess last year. So this was at my personal Ostara ceremony. And I was really, really ill with a sinusitis, which is all about the pituitary gland and all about clearing out the muck and like the mire in your psychic energies. And it was literally a week before the first UK lockdown happened because of COVID. And during that time, obviously I had my Ostara ceremony and something with the sinusitis and the Ostara energies of that time just blew something wide open in me. It just opened up my third eye and crown chakra in ways that I've never experienced before. And that's even as like a very well seasoned oracle and somebody who practices divination. And this was really phenomenal. So the Spirit of Cornwall came through to me. It's come through to me a number of times before, but this time is very prevalent. And the Spirit of Cornwall is one of the main deities that we worship at the temple. And it came through to me and initiated me initially as a priestess of Cornwall. And also the Sacred Flame of Cornwall was initiated at the same time during that ceremony. And then from there, it's always been a goal of mine to open a temple in Cornwall. I wasn't, when you were younger, I was never quite sure that that's what it was called or that's what it should be. But just this idea of a space where people can come and worship Cornwall for all its energies and beauty and just spiritual, magical loveliness. So then that eventually melted into creating the Temple of Cornwall. From there, it's just expanded in ways that I had never quite anticipated. We've just had our first year birthday, which is exciting.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. And what a beautiful place to set up as well. Cornwall's such a lovely part of the country. It's so spiritual, isn't it? It sounds like you had a bit of a spiritual awakening there then. Did you grow up in a spiritual environment? How did you start getting into all of the spiritual practice?
I was raised quite spiritual. I mean, look, at the time it's just normal. It's like, oh yeah, of course we do this here. But looking back, it was very spiritual. So more, I would say Celtic based, but my father was quite Nordic in his beliefs as well. Very like Viking-esque, like I think they're called heathens these days. Yeah, so it was always encouraged in me, but I was always given the freedom to kind of go off and explore whatever faiths or lack thereof that I wanted to.
And did you have any spiritual interactions as a child?
Definitely. So when I was younger, I was able to really see ghosts. That was always like my big thing. That was like my gift in the family because all of my family, most of them, are talented in their own spiritual different ways. But that was my big thing when I was growing up was I could communicate with spirits a lot easier than others could. And my grandparents had brought this, they're still there, it's this gorgeous, very old farmhouse up in the middle of nowhere in Snowdonia in North Wales. I think it was maybe like a year or two after they moved in. They wanted me to come and get a grip on the spaces, like energetically. And they have, do you know what a byre is?
No,
I don't know whether it's a Welsh thing, but on the side of these like very old farm barns, there'd be like something called a byre, which is where either the pigs or the sheepdogs would sleep.
Lean-to.
Yes, yes, like an open front to it. That they took me into the byre and they were like, what feelings are you getting here? And this really sharp pain would like in the middle of my back just came through. And it's I don't know whether you experienced or any of your listeners have experienced this, but when you're experiencing a spirit's pain, it's not painful. You just are aware that there is a pain there. So I told them this and I was like, that's the only thing I'm really getting at the moment. And then my grandma, being the avid researcher that she is, she went away and did all this research. And it turned out that about, I'd say, 150, 200 years before that time, there'd been a murder there. So the farmer's daughter, somebody had fallen in love with her and she didn't want to marry him. She wanted to marry somebody else. So the one that had fallen in love with her murdered her fiancé and stabbed him in the back.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How old were you when you experienced that?
I was maybe just starting high school.
You've told us that you went to Glastonbury and did some of your training at the Goddess Temple. Can you tell us about that? What was it like? What did that involve?
Oh, it was fantastic. It's still one of the best things I've ever done with my life. In what year would it have been? It was beginning of 2018. I was in a very abusive marriage that had been going on for nearly a decade at this point. he would never really let me explore my spiritual side, which after years of being essentially raised that way, felt, I don't know, like being in prison almost. Like I couldn't express myself, like who I am. And I'd seen this advert pop up on, I think it was Facebook at the time, about the Sacred Celebrance Academy that works through the Goddess Glastonbury Temple. So I'd had a look into this and tried to discover what a sacred celebrant is. And that sounded like something that I'd want to do. I was just hoping that I just wander onto a different life path and that would kind of lead me to bigger and better things. So I'd contacted Dawn Kinsella, who's the director of the Sacred Celebrants Academy, and she's phenomenal. She's actually the Temple of Cornwall's mentor, and I love her. She's brilliant. So I got in contact with her. We had a talk, and then I started the course in September. And so by the time September had rolled around, I was actually in the process of leaving my husband, but I don't know if any of your listeners have ever experienced this, but where you know you're leaving them, but you haven't quite made it official yet.
As a member of the divorce club, I know entirely what you mean. Actually, when they finally moved out, you feel like you've gone through some of the breakup process already. Definitely. So I get it.
So I'd gone to the first weekend, and it was phenomenal. It instantly changed me as a person. So I was, like I said, very stifled in my personal life. I mean, I won't ruin it for any of the listeners who are thinking about doing this course, but one of the first ceremonies that they take you through that you get to experience was all these priestesses stood around a fire pit singing Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac. And I was like, oh, I've come home. This is my happy place. I've come home. Yeah, phenomenal. And then I went back to the hotel room on the first night, I think it was. For those of you who've been to Glastonbury, you probably experienced this, but just everything's heightened.
Yeah.
Walking back into the hotel room where my husband had been all day, it was like I couldn't see him through all the bad energy that he just put into that room. It was like smog. And I was like, if this is the energy I've been living in for nearly 10 years at that point, what am I doing with my life? Like, this isn't how I want to live. I don't want to exist in this fog of disempowerment and pain. So then I left him. I think 10 days after that, I moved out. I was like, I've had it. At the time, it was a 9-month course for me. So I'd go back every 6 weeks or so. Yeah, each weekend, it just gave me more of my empowerment back. It brought me, I would say, more in alignment with my higher self. It brought me back home to myself. Definitely. I don't know whether that was what Dawn had planned, but it's definitely what Dawn did for me.
Such a special place, Glastonbury, isn't it? There's something very different about it. Were you living in Cornwall then, or did you move after your course? Because we mentioned Cornwall's such a magical place. You can probably tell by both mine and Rebecca's accent that we're not from, well, I'm not from London, Rebecca's not from Cornwall. So why did you choose to set up in Cornwall?
No, I've been living here since I was 21. We'd always come on holiday here as a child. It's the wild magic that I love here. It's the air is just constantly brimming with potential and magic and connection to anything and everything. And I'd always been very in tune with that as a child growing up. I would always cry whenever we left Cornwall. It just felt like leaving a big part of my soul behind.
It's got such a lovely sort of natural history to it.
It just feels like a completely different country, doesn't it? The landscape, the attitude of the people. When I've gone there, it's felt like a foreign holiday from London. So you've kind of touched on this, but what led to the decision to set up the temple?
Obviously, I've had this connection with Cornwall and the spirit of Cornwall all my life, if not previous lives. I wanted to give back to the energies and also allow people a space to come and worship, or not necessarily worship, but just exist quietly, do whatever they needed to do spiritually in Cornwall, or at least connecting with the energies of Cornwall, because it's something that if it existed when I was younger, I'd have been there all the time. It would have been phenomenal for me. It really would have been. So to offer that to other people just, felt right.
Oh, lovely. And you do these lovely live streams as well on Rebecca's Facebook and Instagram. We'll add some notes to the links on this podcast. They're very calming, they're very beautiful. It's a really special ceremony. So even if you're not there, it feels like you are there. But Dee and I are fascinated with, you always introduce yourself as the creatrix. And that's such a cool word, Rebecca. But could you just explain, what is creatrix?
So creatrix for me means birthing the non-physical. I presume it is a term that can be used by men and non-binaries and gender fluid people as well. But for me, it's really about tapping into the energies of I've not just got this out of thin air. It's not just appeared before me. It's been a real birthing process. I have internalized and created and conceived this idea. I've not just created, I've conceived, germinated and born forth this
I get it. You explain things so well.
I was just going to say, listening to Rebecca talk, I'm always just fascinated. I feel like I could just sit here and listen to you talk for ages.
Yeah.
Rebecca, you talk about the Spirit of Cornwall. Is that the name of the Spirit of Cornwall?
Yeah, it's hard to give it a name other than that because it's so balanced. It's neither feminine nor masculine. It's neither good nor bad. It's just the all-encompassing spirit deity of Cornwall. You know, if you do the priestess training that we offer, you live 2 years within the wheel of Cornwall, and that encompasses all the different energies that go into the Spirit of Cornwall. So without the wheel in front of me, I'm going to try and remember them. So going from Ostara, you've got the Cornish fairies. Then at Beltane, you've got Canonos, the god of the wild. Then we've got the mermaid priestesses of Lyonesse, the sunken temple there. You've got the goddess Kerr, who's this lovely grain mother goddess. She's perpetually pregnant, but in that glowing second trimester stage, and she loves you unconditionally. We've got the powerful and mighty Morgana Le Fay. We have the dragon serpent lines of this land as well. We've got Merlin. And we have the Cornish knockers. And then at the centre of all that is the Spirit of Cornwall, because to me, all those different energies are very present in Cornwall and make up the deity of Cornwall.
You're the priestess of Cornwall. Are there different priestess for different areas of the UK?
You can become a priestess or priest of nearly anything and everything these days, which I love. There's always like an area of specialty that people can really devote themselves to. But I think within the UK, that the priestess movement is really big right now. And I love that. It's one of my favourite, movement isn't quite a word, but one of my favourite kind of empowerment things that people are doing right now. So you can be a priestess of Cornwall, obviously priestess of Avalon, Rhiannon, Cerridwen, lots of different goddess energies as well. I know there is a temple being opened in Scotland, so I'm not sure whether they do training or will be offering training, or what they would prefer their students to be called as well when they dedicate.
What is involved in running a temple? Tell us about your different events and activities. Obviously, we're doing some events together, all of us, which is great. So tell us more about them. Yeah,
so in no particular order, we have the Priestess of Cornwall training. I'm going to use the term priestess, but it is open to men and gender fluids and non-binary people as well. But I'll use the term priestess for ease. And this is a 2-year course where, like I think I previously mentioned, you can spiral within the Wheel of Cornwall for 2 years, and you learn so many different things. I'm really proud of this offering. It's incredible. You get so many different ceremonies, guided meditations. I think there's 58 lessons all in all throughout the 2 years. You get group circles, one-on-ones with me, all sorts. And it's designed to be ran online and offline, depending on your location and obviously COVID. And then we do the red tents as well, which is where you guys come in, because you are the semi-permanent guest facilitators of that, which is amazing. We're so happy to have you there.
They are so lovely.
Thank you. So the red tents are where we celebrate the full moon, but every month we'll also get to experience and learn about a different feminine archetype. It's a beautiful space. We also offer lots of different types of divination services. So I can channel for people, do tarot readings, Owen readings, runes.
I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. What religion are you? Like, if someone asked you that, what do you say?
What I tend to say is pagan, because I feel like that covers an awful lot of groundwork, because I couldn't pin myself as just being Wiccan or a witch or heathen. My spirituality, and I'm sure many people's, is so multifaceted and so ever-changing that I feel like to pin myself as just one thing would be really confusing, because I wouldn't be that thing tomorrow, let alone, a month, a week, whatever down the line. So pagan is just the general term that I go by.
Yeah, we hear it. And it's kind of the phrase you use more to help others who need to label you or put you in some kind of box so they understand you better. And it's like, fine, here, just use this word, whatever, we get it.
We do.
So, Rebecca, you mentioned that you channel the goddess. Was it the goddess or the Spirit of Cornwall?
I channel many.
I'm so nosy about this. Okay. So what does that mean? What does that involve? What does that look like to an outsider?
I'm going to use the terms channeling and oracling quite interchangeably, because to me, they mean the same thing. Channeling for me has always, looking back, been very natural. Do you know that the history of the oracles of Delphi?
No.
A little bit, no. So the oracles of Delphi, they were in ancient Greece. The bottom level of their temple was just earth. and this earth would crack open at random times, not significantly so, it wasn't like a big earthquake, but there would just be rips in the earth. And these priestesses over time started to realize that the gases that were emitted from underneath their temple would allow them to oracle and would allow them to channel their goddess or their gods at the time. And now, with science and everything that we know about the gases there, they were obviously hallucinogenic slightly. So these priestesses would use these slightly hallucinogenic gases that were within their temple, and they would hover over them almost like they were yoni steaming, but not quite. They would inhale them, and people could come and pay them to oracle for them. So they would oracle their goddess. I don't do it so intensely as that, but that's essentially what happens. So for me, it feels like Rebecca, takes a step out the back of this body, and whatever spirit energy needs to can come in from my soul star chakra down. And usually I can feel it kind of rest in my womb space, so my sacral chakra. And then from there, that's where they can use my body, however they need to. Usually it's through word, but I do channel poetry. I've channeled art before, which was odd because I'm an artist, very bad artist. I've danced before. There's so many different ways it comes through, but it is predominantly word for me. Facial features will change slightly. I'll hold myself in a different way. It's not me, it's just the human casing of me.
That's so fascinating.
It is, isn't it?
Both Tracy and I are just leaning forward, eyes wide open.
I'm getting closer and closer to my screen. So do you ask who you want, or it's always a surprise?
I always invite whoever needs to come in. So I know whether it's for me or a client, it's okay, who do I or they need to hear from, who's got the most prominent and important message for this person at this time, and they'll always come through.
I actually took Tracy along to her first trip to Glastonbury.
Yeah.
And it was so lovely, wasn't it? I mean, it was a rainy, horrible day, and I was planning on taking her back, but lockdown and blah, blah, blah. But it's just such a magical place, isn't it? I can't explain it. And it's so small, isn't it? I've read somewhere that there's only about 8,000 permanent residents in Glastonbury, which is like one street in London. And it's got Christianity links and the spiritual links. That is our message from the Glastonbury Tourist Board.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you something, Rebecca, because we're just fascinated and we just love listening to you talk. Can you tell us your favourite story from Cornish folklore?
Ooh, Tristan and Isolde. It's got to be Tristan and Isolde. So this is actually, I can do a small reading if you want, because part of the Priestess of Cornwall training was me doing storytelling. So I can read you my little rendition of it. Do you want that?
Loved that.
Do I?
So this is called The Love of Tristan and Isolde. Ever since he was a young boy, Tristan had lived with his uncle, Mark, the King of Cornwall. During his youth, Tristan would squire for the king, and eventually he would train to become the most impressive knight that Cornwall had seen for centuries. People would often compare him to the great knights of the Round Table, for he captured their chivalrous outlook on all aspects of his life. One day at court, what was up until this point a very pleasant and normal day was interrupted by the ominous sound of an uninvited guest arriving at the gates of King Mark's castle. The horse's hooves thundering with every gallop, kicking up dust and anticipation in its wake, all the while getting louder and louder and closer, until eventually the stranger reached the gates and slowly looked up at the guards. They shouted down to him, inquiring as to a name, or at the very least a title. The stranger continued to stare at them for what seemed like an uncomfortable amount of time, never blinking. His voice eventually boomed back at them. I am the one and only Maraude, the greatest swordsman in all of Ireland. Now I aim to be the greatest swordsman in all of England. For you see, I have come for your king's head, for I think he quite a prize for my trophy room. What with the not so thinly veiled threats, the guards would obviously not let him enter the castle. Maraude refused to leave, though, him being one to never quite take no for an answer. Instead, Maraude waited it out, sometimes pacing quietly. At others, he would shout up to guards and taunt them, teasing them, just hoping to goad one of them into coming down and fighting him. He could afford such cocky behaviour as he knew the guards could not kill or maim him, for he had the protection of his niece, a famed healer and enchantress throughout Ireland. Before Maraude had left Ireland, he had asked on his niece's powers and asked for a protection spell and a poison. She crafted the spell, the most potent spell she had ever woven, and her poison was equally as powerful. The protection spell was housed in a small jar that Maraude wore around his neck, for it would only protect those that it touched. So for every arrow that the guards of King Mark's castle fired at Maraude, they would somehow bounce off his body, not even piercing the worn leather armour that he wore. Word quickly reached King Mark of Maraude's presence and his seemingly supernatural powers. King Mark was too old to fight these days, and especially against such magic. How was he ever expected to win? He had no heir, so if he died this day, then his kingdom would fall along with his legacy. Tristan could see the turmoil in his uncle's eyes, so he picked up his sword and asked for his uncle's permission to fight Maraude in his place as his champion. As much as King Mark loved the boy, this did rather solve his conundrum, so he allowed Tristan to fight Maraude as his champion. Tristan took up this chance to defend the honour of his king and strode towards the gates and Maraude. As he approached, he shouted to the guards to open the gate, so the guards did as he commanded. Tristan was now face to face with the dreaded Maraude. Maraude, noticing that this young man was not in fact the old king he had requested, was instantly angered. "And just who do you think you are, little boy, to come and fight me with your fancy sword is very presumptive of you. Where is the old man and his crown?" Maraude shouted. "The king has much more important things to be doing with his time than fighting with a madman, so he sent me, the best man for the job, for I am Tristan, the greatest swordsman Cornwall has ever seen," replied Tristan. "If I must kill a mouse to then kill the lion, then so be it," Maraude boldly said as he unsheathed his sword. Both men were instantly ready to fight to the death. Tristan was kicked to draw his sword, but before he could attempt to strike Maraude, his arm was nicked by the blade of Maraude's sword. The two danced around each other, one trying to hit the other and avoid being hit themselves. Tristan, knowing of Maraude's apparently supernatural abilities, knew that the key to Maraude's impenetrability must be close to hand, for no mortal could not be pierced, and the gods were never as cruel as Maraude. So Tristan had to keep one eye on Maraude's blade and another on the lookout for the magical amulet that protected his attacker so. Maraude was full of fancy fighting moves, and he was spinning around trying to strike Tristan's legs, when the protection spell jar revealed itself from underneath his shirt. Tristan noticed it immediately, and in the blink of an eye he had drawn his smaller dagger from its belt and cut the jar from around Maraude's neck. Maraude could only stop and stare in disbelief as Tristan crushed the bottle in his hand and finally lunged his sword through Maraude's heart. With his dying breath, Maraude sneered at Tristan and told him, "That scratch I gave you on your arm, boy, you'll want that seeing to, for I laced my sword with a mighty strong poison. The only antidote is to be found with my niece in Ireland. E08 is her name, and to my house and land she belongs." With that, Maraude died at the gates of King Mark's castle. Tristan did not hesitate to take a boat across to Ireland, the fastest in his uncle's fleet. When they landed in Ireland, he was taken to Maraude's land, and there they were greeted by E08 herself. By this point, Tristan was hazy and losing consciousness from the poison, so his men had to explain to E08 what had happened. E08, so it seemed, was glad to hear of her uncle's death, for he was a brute to her and kept her locked up on his land. So she had never seen anything other than the barren land and cold stronghold that belonged to Maraude. She took great pity on the sweet man Tristan, and immediately administered him the antidote. Tristan was then given a room to rest and heal in. It took 3 full days for him to fully heal and come around. His men took great delight in telling Tristan about what had happened during the past 3 days. E08 had told them about all the abuses her uncle Maraude had put her through, and how her magical powers only worked upon his land, and that is why he kept her locked up. She had stated that she did not care for her magical abilities, as they were a gift from her wicked uncle. Now that he was dead, though, she had nowhere to go. The men had had a thought, they gleefully told Tristan. The king still needed an heir, and E08 needed a place to live, so why not have them marry and conceive a child? A messenger was sent to King Mark, and he excitedly agreed that the men could bring E08 back with them, and that the two of them would be married upon her arrival to Cornwall. Tristan was to be her escort back on the boat that very day. He was rather curious, for he had not properly met E08 yet, but all the men spoke so highly of her, often speaking of her kindness, her beauty, and her strength. After changing into clothes befitting the occasion, Tristan was formally introduced to E08, and his breath momentarily left his body when he saw her for the first time. She was as beautiful as a sunflower on a summer's morning. Her voice was as sweet as the nectar of the gods. How could he help but fall in love with such a woman? Little did he know that whilst he was falling in love with Isolde, she too was falling deeply in love with him. She had noticed his eyes first, and how the hazel colours in them deepened in the light. Isolde saw how those eyes gazed at her, and Tristan saw how her eyes gazed the same way at him. And so they both knew that they were in love, a terribly doomed sort of love. Tristan, being the man of honour that he was, tried to hide his feelings for Isolde, but a lover's fierce as theirs could not be suppressed when they were together. So together Tristan and Isolde agreed that for the boat ride they would be together, but upon their arrival they would see each other as little as possible. So that night on the boat, Tristan and Isolde made love so passionately that it changed them to their very core. Isolde was wedded to King Mark and lived the life of a gracious queen. She adored her husband but had no real love for him. King Mark was happy with his new bride though, and allowed her many freedoms and privileges. The night that Tristan and Isolde had made love, they knew that they would have to see each other again. But there was a palpable connection between them that was hard to hide. So they would only meet under the light of the full moon once a month. This would go on for months until King Mark grew suspicious of their behaviour. So on the next full moon, he sent his best spy to follow the couple and witness their affair. Tristan and Isolde, being so wrapped up in each other's presence, did not even notice the spy. And so the spy was witness to the couple's kisses, words of love and tender touches. The spy snuck through the darkness of the night back to the king to report his findings. King Mark was heartbroken, for the love he bore for his nephew was like that of a son, and although he knew his wife did not love him, he was fond of her and thought they had a shared respect. It seemed he was mistaken though, and this betrayal caused him a great anger. He waited until morning to seek his revenge upon the lovers. Whilst he was still sleeping, Tristan was accosted by the king's guards, yelling at him to get dressed and come with them to present himself to King Mark and face judgment for his treasonous actions. Tristan was understandably shaken and confused by this, but did as he was told as quickly as possible. Tristan was marched into the throne room to face King Mark and Queen Isolde. Isolde herself had little knowledge of what was happening, for her husband had only told her to present herself in court for a surprise. When she saw Tristan being thrown to the floor in front of her throne, she screamed and cried, for she knew that they had been found, and that the price to pay for treason is death. Tristan knew as much as well and had resigned himself to his fate. Death was a worthy price to pay for all the months of love and passion that Isolde had given him. King Mark confirmed Isolde's worries when he told the court about Tristan and Isolde's affair. He exclaimed rather loudly about the betrayal and the treason from the two people he loved the most. Eventually, after his anger had run its course, King Mark declared that Tristan was to be executed by beheading, and that it was to happen right now in this very throne room. Tristan was pushed to his knees before his queen, the woman he loved so very much. And just before the executioner's sword touched his throat, he said to her, "I will love you even beyond death, and in death is where we shall find each other again, my love." With that, the executioner gave his blow, and Tristan was no more. Isolde screamed and cried and tried to look away, but King Mark forced her to look at the body of her lover. He told her how he would have mercy on her and how he would let her live, for the pain that Tristan's grisly death caused is punishment enough. King Mark was right. The pain, the grief, and the now empty part of her was too much to bear. She cried non-stop for 30 days. On the 31st day, she did not cry, nor did she speak. On that night, the night of the full moon, she walked towards the cliff edge and gazed out to sea. She let herself fall into the sea beneath her, allowing its strength to reunite her with her beloved Tristan. In the morning, her body was found by a local fisherman, who brought her back to King Mark. King Mark could finally see the pain he had caused his queen and his nephew, who sobbed out all of his anger until there was nothing left but pity and guilt. He had Isolde buried next to Tristan, just as married couples are. From both of their graves grew two separate rose bushes. Tristan's grave sprouted white roses, and from Isolde's, red roses bloomed. The two bushes intertwined and created the pink rose. And so Tristan and Isolde were together again, peacefully and as madly in love as they were in life. The end.
Oh, that was Very emotional. I feel emotional after that.
Yeah.
It was a roller coaster. I should say that that was a surprise question to you. So I feel very lucky that you had that prepared because that was lovely.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. That was really nice.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So Cornwall sounds, in fact, we know because we've been, but for anyone who hasn't visited, it's a really beautiful place. It doesn't really need much advertisement. But are there any towns or areas or places that are special to you that you could recommend for people that want to visit?
Oh, definitely. There's so many, so I won't bore you with all of them. And in no particular order, Tintagel, that's always been like my home. Like getting
strongly associated with Merlin is Tintagel.
Merlin, yeah, there's Merlin's cave underneath the castle, which is an amazing space. If you can get in there when nobody else is around, it's spectacular to chant in there or to meditate. It takes you to another dimension, I'm sure. It's phenomenal. If you do go to Tintagel, do check out the fudge shop, the one at the top of the high street, because it is the best fudge I've ever had. And I've had a lot of fudge in my life. It's amazing. There's the Merry Maiden Stone Circle down west, which is, I think is kind of well known these days, probably not as much as some, but this is beautiful. So this is it's my first memory of being in a stone circle at a sacred site. Land's End in general, the energies there, you're not necessarily the tourist trap Land's End, but if you go and park there and do the coastal walks, it's beautiful energy, really ancestral memories come through there. And Hellman's Tor.
Well, that brings me on very nicely to the next question, which is, can you name a couple of places to avoid in Cornwall, either because they are tourist traps or because, dare I say, they don't live up to the hype?
I think because like each place has its own charm, but whether it's a Cornish charm or not. Truro for me, but I just don't like cities, really. I can't think of anywhere that doesn't have its charm, really.
Obviously, from an outsider's point of view, driving around Cornwall, even though you can tell that some bits are clearly more touristic than others, it's still so lovely. You could tell why everyone wants to go there because it's so lovely.
Oh, that's nice to know then, Rebecca, that there's no places to avoid in Cornwall. It's such a good place. Are you doing courses then, Rebecca? There's some exciting changes happening. I know you've launched your website. And if you are doing courses, could you tell us a little bit about them?
So at the moment, we offer a Priestess of Cornwall training. And again, I just use the term priestess very widely there. It can be, this course is made for men, women, and everyone on whatever end of the gender spectrum you're on. Yeah, the Priestess Training is a 2-year course. And the first spiral starts at Mabon this year, so towards the end of September. I'm so proud of this offering that we do. Each year you live within the Wheel of Cornwall, so you get to explore the labyrinth of Cornwall and deep dive into it, and also your connection to the Cornwall and the Spirit of Cornwall as well. Again, it's split up into every 6-ish weeks or so. You get some new course material, but for every 6 weeks you get an awful lot. So you get no particular order, a one-on-one with me where I can help guide people through, if they're a bit lost on their priestess path, I can help bring them back to like a central ground. Or if they have any spiritual questions or anything, we can discuss that there. There's a group circle as well on Zoom, so you can get to know your fellow sacred siblings. There's, depending where you live and COVID restrictions, there'll be an optional sacred walk out on the land as well. You also get a ceremony every 6 weeks that's led by me. And this is a different ceremony depending on the time of year and what you're learning at that time, because it's all in keeping with the Wheel of the Year. So, for example, around Samhain, we learn a lot about Morgana Le Fay and her role and how she can help us be emboldened as priestesses and how she can help us heal as well, because there's also the healing modality that we use at the temple. For example, the ceremony then is a ceremony for deep inner healing, so that the healer is healed in order to heal those around them. You also get a guided meditation that can also be found only through this course, because I do guided meditations everywhere, but just through this course, it's just for the priestesses in training. And then this goes on till Lammas, which is obviously the August holiday. And this is when they dedicate as a brother, sister, or sacred sibling of Cornwall after their first year. And then once more, the spiral starts again when they start in September. But this time there's also the optional extra of shadow journal prompts, because I never like to push people to do shadow work because that seems really harsh. So those are always optional. And again, with extra aftercare and support there as well from me and the team here at the temple. And then at Lammas, the year after that, they dedicate as a full-blown priest of Cornwall. I teach you how to channel. This is just a very minimal list of what I teach. Tarot readings, how to intuitively read tarot, how to heal, how to cleanse space, how to make sacred space, empowerment. That's a really big thing within this course. It's a constant journey of empowerment for people.
What do you actually have to believe in to start this course? You know, like if you're a Christian, you believe in God and Jesus and so forth, blah, blah, blah. It's a little bit harder to define, isn't it, in this quotation marks pagan spirituality world. So what do you actually have to believe in to start your course, or who is this course for?
I love this question. So this course is for anybody who believes in a higher power. If they feel like they're connected to, whether you call it source, higher self, whether your god or goddess has a particular name. Obviously, we will be exploring the Spirit of Cornwall very deeply within this course, but that's not to say that you have to believe in the Spirit of Cornwall and only the Spirit of Cornwall. Like a question I get asked quite a lot in the consultations I have with potential students is, can I still worship Odin or Rhiannon or whoever? Not? Absolutely. If you're spiritual in general, and particularly if you feel a calling or like a pull towards Cornish spirituality.
Oh, it sounds like a really lovely journey.
You're hand-holding, which is lovely, isn't it? Mm-hmm. When you finish this course, you qualify as a priestess. Mm-hmm. What does that actually mean?
This is my interpretation of a priestess. Bear in mind, everybody's will be slightly different. But the way I live as a priestess means that my whole life is dedicated to this role and to this specific aspect. So again, ignore being a priestess of Cornwall for a moment. It's just more a priestess in general. So dedicated to not just my own spiritual path, but also helping others who need them. As a priestess of Cornwall, we've got somebody coming on who will do be a temple healer, a temple musician, temple librarian. We've got somebody interested in being, which is very cool.
Oh, lovely. Someone to sort all your books out, Rebecca.
Yeah.
You have a lot of books. I can see them all behind you. You don't have to live in Cornwall to do the course, I'd imagine, but you have to maybe feel a connection to Cornwall. Is that right?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, we've got people all over the world interested in this course. We've got a woman in Canada who's really interested, Scotland, Italy.
Wow.
All over. So, yeah, I would say as long as you feel a connection to the land.
What advice would you give to anyone who's either starting their spiritual journey or a bit lost on their spiritual journey?
Okay, more like this. It's easy to get hung up on other people's opinions on their own spirituality. You'll find because paganism and spirituality in general is so wild that, you know, that there's no regulations and ruling, which is a good thing. I'm all for that. I love the wildness of it. But you will find there's a lot of people that think that they themselves are an expert and they are the only voice that is worth hearing. Don't get hung up on other people's opinions on how you should be feeling, doing, being. It's your journey. So if you can, try and tap into your own inner still point, which I think we've spoken about briefly already. Tap into that stillness within you and see how you feel about something. You know, whether you're deciding between two different training courses or, you know, do I really need a moldavite crystal? Like, God, they're, you know, a bit expensive. Like, do I need this? Tap into that place within you where everybody else's energy and voices are hushed and it's just that sacred silence within you. Really tap into this intuitive part and feel your way through your path. If you feel like you need a guide, you know, reach out to people that you trust and really vibe with, but don't listen to people who'll just comment on every single Facebook status really angry and, well, this is how I do it. Don't listen.
As Tracy and I say in almost every episode, basically do what you want. Right?
Exactly.
There's so many opinions on can't do this, you can't buy your own tarot decks, or you have to do this to cleanse your crystals or whatever. Just do whatever feels intuitive to you, right?
Exactly.
Don't put pressure on yourself. Like, I'm moon sign Virgo, so there's a little bit of me that becomes a little bit obsessive and I need to know, but why? What's the answer? And it's quite nice to just relax and think, well, sometimes there's no proven answer. It's just how you're feeling, and go on your intuition and just take it easy. And if you don't know what you want to do or what your name is or what your practice is, relax and go with what you feel.
I think that's lovely advice, Rebecca. Thank you so much for joining us. We are just so honoured to speak to you, to have met you, and we're really excited about loads of collaborations in the future. So
yes, me too. Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun. My first ever podcast interview.
I know, you're our podcast virgin and now you're not anymore. Thank you very much. And we will catch you for the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
If you want to learn more about Rebecca Burgess and the Temple of Cornwall, then check out her website, willowceremonies.com. If you enjoyed that and you want more from us, why don't you head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/We Knew the Moon. and check out some bonus content.
Also, if you want to stay up to date, you can follow us on our Facebook page at we.new.the.moon. If you could leave us a review on our Facebook page, that would mean a lot.
Our Instagram handle is the same as our Facebook, at we.new.the.moon. We're on Twitter at WeKnewTheMoon1, and we are also on Pinterest. Just search for We Knew the Moon.
Finally, if you want lots more fun, moon info and all things spiritual, plus our lovely shop, please visit our website, wenewthemoon.co.uk.